It's been a while, so welcome back to my art channel, or welcome for the very first time if you're new here. I've collected some of your questions about working as an illustrator, and what better video to try and answer those than a book illustration painting process. I'll be painting an end paper, so the illustration that goes just inside the cover of a book. In this case, the limited edition release of Thanks for Nothing, for which I've created multiple illustrations. As always, I prepared with sketches, from rough composition ideas to small color studies. Since this question here mentions color studies and references, maybe this is a good place to start, as those also mark the beginning of every illustration. More so than the process, I'll be focusing on business-related questions. I of course also create sketches for my personal pieces, but specifically for client work, they are incredibly important for communication. Usually I create multiple options, narrow it down to 3 to send to the client, and then paint color studies and more detailed pose sketches once we've picked an overall composition and direction. It's very important to me to be in full control of my references. I never use anything that I just found online, but make sure I have either the commercial rights, those are included when you buy reference photo packs, for example, that I use public domain art, or I just shoot my own photos and combine all of those with 3D models that I pose and light myself to match the scene. Often the author or art director will also have an art brief with additional references like pieces they commissioned from other artists, their own sketches, concept art, or some kind of mood board. My mind is always working on so many ideas. I always have personal projects I want to paint, sometimes single paintings, sometimes a series of illustrations or sketches, and it just depends on my schedule if I can get any of those done. But I always get so much energy from personal work where I experiment and challenge myself. I have a large sketchbook that I use to collect all of these ideas. And then the right moment will present itself and I have at least 2 or 3 ideas ready to go, already with pose studies or color studies, and I can just dive in. Honestly, I enjoy having client deadlines as those give me a lot of structure. I think client projects keep me productive, keep me focused, and then the personal art is like the cherry on top in my free time. It's actually really windy, kind of stormy outside. I hope you can't hear that in this recording. But yeah, I painted a little bit only last night. I usually prefer doing these first color touches during the day when I have nice lighting. It's been really dark and cloudy lately anyway, so I really just wanted to get started. I'm using a very yellow-toned palette. Even the darkest skin tones here are much more yellow due to me using raw umber, transparent yellow, iron oxide, and just a bit of burnt umber as the most reddish tone. And as always when I'm painting vampires, there's a bit of a paleness that happens when I shift from a living human's skin tone to someone officially undead. So I'm using some more viridian green hue, a little bit of cobalt blue, and the same burnt umber, transparent yellow, iron oxide, and raw umber for the skin tone here. The underpainting has the same burnt sienna in it, which I used just for some of the lines you can still see here. So there is a bit of warmth underneath it. I don't want it to be completely cold, and there will be yellow highlights that I add at a much later stage. At this point, I really just wanted to figure out this key area. I don't want to have huge jumps in saturation. I want it all to flow together harmoniously. And that can look weird until you've established everything around it. As you can see, I'm not yet using my wet palette, my Stay Wet palette, just a regular paper palette. It's so early in the process, my color mixes are incredibly basic. A lot will change along the way anyway, so I'm not mixing large quantities yet. So using something like this is much quicker than the whole sponge setup. Mixing with a lot of yellow tones, especially when combined with, for example, cobalt blue as another main color, can lead to everything getting a bit of a greenish tint, so I have to be careful. I have a couple red tones to balance that out with this violet oxide, which is a very new addition to my palette. I'm using it for the first time. And of course my beloved alizarin crimson hue, which I use so often that the label has scratched off quite a bit. Titanium white is used a lot at this stage. I'm working quite pale for the skin tones and hair and pretty much anything except the black clothing. Now, I've been trying out this heavy body acrylic by Liquitex. I got the titanium white because that's always a good starting point, right? You can always use up more white paint tubes. And I really like the texture. It's not quite as dense as the golden. I did notice that the Liquitex, when used in a mix, has more darkening upon drying. That can be very subtle when you observe it, but there's this spot here on her cheek which should be a highlight, and it looked quite a bit lighter than the rest of her skin when I first applied it. But I noticed that the Liquitex Heavy Body Acrylic Titanium White would kind of perfectly match the paint mix I had created before, but then dry darker. So when at one stage I noticed that I was getting streaks of darker grayish looking paint, I switched back. You can still see hints of it here on her skin near the collarbones, and again here where I had wanted to place highlights. So I'll continue using it for background elements where small changes aren't so important, but when doing my final highlights, I'll definitely return to just the golden heavy body. I was just curious how this would perform. Have to say I'm not super happy with that. I'm at the stage that I kind of call getting to know my painting. I have a color study, but still there are a lot of smaller decisions that I still have to make, right? I use 3D reference images, but I'm not just copying those one-to-one. I don't particularly like all the lighting properties that I can create in DAZ 3D. So lots of gray tones, but I promise it's not just black and white paint. There's a lot of cobalt, viridian, raw umber, and transparent yellow iron oxide everywhere, and I'm still figuring out the balance. And once I've nailed this area, everything else will fall into place, and that's what we'll be doing today. The reason I'm working with quite small brushes even at this early stage is that acrylics can't be reblended or blended into with a second color layer like oils. So a really rough underpainting only serves me in filling up the empty space. It doesn't actually solve any questions that I have. So while I used some medium-sized flat brushes for some of the background area, just filling in paint at this point isn't actually helpful. I'd rather make sure that all my choices are deliberate, and that means using some smaller brushes and already committing to details at this point. It's a bit strange to explain, but I always feel connected to my illustrations, even if they are client work. Maybe I can feed off the creative energy of others. Writers and the editors or art directors and publishers working on bringing their books into reality put so much into the project, and I get to reflect some of that back with my illustrations. Take their precious characters and worlds and bring them to life. So it's an honor, and I enjoy the collaborative nature of the process. And I also just enjoy the technical aspect. Completing a painting, especially a scene that I would have struggled with a year ago, is incredibly rewarding to me. and I find a lot of emotional fulfillment in just the craft of illustrating. Of course, when I get to paint personal pieces, that applies even more. So while I can see that one could fall out of love with a painting, I'm maybe just really stubborn and or patient. I also try to give my mind some space. I don't have to feel deeply for every second of the process, especially during the ugly phase when everything is half finished and still looks a bit wonky. I often listen to audiobooks for hours upon hours to not get too much into my emotions and anxiety about the process and just continue painting one brush stroke at a time. Winged Jedi asked about my structure as an illustrator. She specifically mentioned daily structure, but I think it's actually the monthly and weekly scheduling that really makes the difference for me. While I may be sketching or preparing references for one illustration in the morning, I might then spend the afternoon painting another illustration where I've already gotten the go-ahead from the client. Feedback can take a while, and there might be multiple rounds of sketches before I find a composition that works. So I always try to plan ahead and have another painting already on my easel to work on during those wait times. So usually I have things planned out about half a year in advance, but with some room for improvisation, for spontaneous ideas, for some more rushed client projects that have intense deadlines but are interesting. And then I have some monthly tasks that repeat. Creating my prints for Patreon, for example, sending those letters at the start of each new month, attending 1 or 2 events here in South Korea, and then there are some seasonal things like sketching outdoors during the warmer months and then again hiding in my painting cave during winter. The actual day-to-day structure is honestly just incredibly boring. Painting really takes up the majority of my time. I try to get sketches done early in the day to warm up at the same time, then paint for a couple hours, and in the later afternoon I'm often doing the digital parts. Answering emails, scanning sketches or finished pieces, preparing print files, as well as packaging and shipping and running errands. And then after a longer break for dinner, I usually return for some really focused painting time at night. I'm a night owl, so this is when I get the largest bulk of my work done. It's also why the lighting in most of my painting process videos is quite terrible. Since I mentioned videos, I usually edit those when I don't have any big illustrations to finish. In that case, I try to film during the morning when the lighting is best and then edit in the evenings, if I have dedicated footage. It's a nice break from painting and lets my hand and shoulder rest by doing something different. How did I get started? It's been a pretty long journey. I did work in other fields before this and even talked about it in more detail during a sketchbook tour where I looked at my oldest sketchbook and the art style evolution that came with it. But I've always been quite risk averse, so I took the transition into working as a book illustrator very, very slowly. For years, I had more design and marketing focused freelance work and would just practice painting and drawing until I could take on smaller commissions on the side. Those simple character portrait commissions then, over time, led to small opportunities in the tabletop gaming space, which is close to novel illustrations, but especially the interior illustrations are often a bit less complex. I actually drew a lot of maps in the beginning when I was still uncomfortable with colors. It took me forever to build up a portfolio, as my freelance work always was the priority. I never just went all in to pursue this dream. That just felt way too risky, and I wanted to slowly transition my income. There were also so many hiccups along the way, from some health-related setbacks to the constant changes to international shipping over the last 6 years. It can feel like whenever you've built something, there would be a new hurdle to stop that from working, so I don't like relying on just one single path, but always want a bit of diversification to be safe. when I finally felt more secure in my painting skills and art style and took some time off from design and marketing to focus on creating the Dracula-themed art for my art scene, that was when my portfolio started to get more attention, and I got more and more opportunities to work on books through it. So having that clearer visual identity and direction really helped. Sometimes I do look back and wish I'd pursued this genre of illustration work much earlier, but in the end I needed the time to practice and actually be able to pull off certain subjects, and I'm glad I took it slow. Also specifically for book illustration, while I transitioned to book illustration from tabletop games and private commissions, there's also a bit of an evolution inside book illustration itself. You probably won't start out by making wraparound covers. Instead, do interior pieces or chapter headers or character art used for promotions. Charging for illustrations is a whole subject of its own, and I have linked some helpful resources in the description. How I charge personally mostly depends on two things: the actual complexity and size of an illustration, and the scope of the intended commercial use: marketing, printing as a book cover, or printing for additional merchandise like bookmarks or separate art prints sold by the author or publisher. There are a lot of really helpful resources out there to help with figuring out commercial licensing fees as well, which I add as a percentage on top of a base rate. I also charge a lower percentage specifically for indie authors and found some really interesting projects to paint for through that. And their usually more relaxed deadlines makes it easy to then schedule other more rushed and intense work around them. The actual illustrations always still belong to me. I don't offer a complete buyout option. But for example, I wouldn't use an illustration created for a book in my shop or on Patreon, except if I discuss that clearly with the author. And I also respect their publishing schedule and don't release illustrations earlier than a book announcement or cover reveal. That's just manners, but also is something to discuss ahead of time. There might be formal NDAs for bigger projects as well, or it might just be specified in the contract or art brief. Stephanie Holmes, the author of Thanks for Nothing, from the very beginning was incredibly open to me sharing work-in-progress pictures and painting footage here without strict timing restrictions, though we still communicated to make sure that some art reveals happened at the same time as the Kickstarter launch, of course. I think a lot of these topics are really all about communication with the individual clients you work for, being clear in what you expect, what they expect, and having everything documented in written form somewhere. Funnily enough, I found that contracts get easier when working with larger publishers, as they have their standard forms ready to go and it's just all about carefully reading through them. Most, if not all, my work nowadays is for international clients, so there are also a lot of administrative tasks like invoicing, keeping track of different currencies and time zones that might not apply to your situation as much. Since we've been talking contracts, nowadays authors and publishers often, if not always, include a clause about not using any GenAI during any part of the process. And in reverse, I also specify the same, that I don't work on AI projects, don't want AI references provided, and that my art may not be edited with AI tools after I hand it in. Personally, I got really lucky with my timing. I already had just enough clients before the whole GenAI wave invaded the art space. I can only imagine how tough it is to have to prove your art is truly yours and compete against the sheer quantity of slop and scams. And the fields that I started in, those smaller private character art commissions and smaller tabletop illustrations, those seem to be the fields more heavily impacted by a decline in available work. I've never directly reached out to an author that I'd like to work with, though game companies or book publishers often do have official contacts to send your portfolio to, though some only for a limited time every year. So cold emailing is definitely part of the process. For me personally, sharing my art online, especially the Dracula illustrations that got quite popular in some spaces, actually did make a difference, as I got several follow-up commissions from those. But even then, authors or publishers will reach out to me via my portfolio website and the business email listed there and on my social media. I've been a bit inconsistent with social media over the years, as they've also all changed quite a lot, and different types of images perform better or worse on each of them. Back when I started to work in this field, I really found most of my work through reaching out directly to art directors or publishers, often of smaller publications like anthologies, or still in the tabletop gaming space. And sending them samples or a link to my portfolio is really all I did. And I think overall the value of social media promotion can be quite overrated when it comes to commissions. I do have some platforms that work well for me. Tumblr is my oldest one, and my Dracula art specifically found a lot of people there. YouTube has been amazing for me to share my art process, but these videos are more for me to experiment and express myself, share personal projects like art scenes or art prints, and I don't think I've ever gotten a commission through these. But I do think it's a great place if you're focused on your personal art and want to be very independent and self-employed instead of working freelance or as an illustrator for hire. So maybe promoting a print shop or your own books. For some specific platforms I also used Etsy. I did have a shop in the past, but the platform has become quite a mess and the fees never made it all that attractive for commission work. My portfolio website, YouTube and Instagram are probably the most important when it comes to getting eyes on my illustrations, but the actual book commissions come in through the contact information on my website or direct emails. At art markets and book fairs, I'm more focused on selling prints and scenes, so I don't really give out my commission info there, and I've generally stopped working for clients here in Korea since the book illustration style that I do doesn't quite match what is popular here. I can't speak to Discord as I'm only on that for art feedback groups or just chatting with friends, and never had any commissions through that. I do know that VGen is a new platform that seems quite popular, and I also want to shout out the Bookish Artists Compendium, an artist-vetted lineup of illustrators working in the field where authors can go to find character art or cover designs or anything really, without worrying about scams, fake portfolios or AI or all of the above. Personally, I'm not part of either of those communities or platforms, and I'm currently a bit too busy to actively look for new clients, but I do plan to apply in the future, just on principle and because it's an amazing idea. Alright, just a quick check-in before I start painting this morning. As you can see, my desk kind of devolves into pure chaos with just paint tubes and brushes and paper towels everywhere. Here's my tablet where I have the clothing and drapery references, and right now I focused on the main focus of the painting for most of yesterday's painting session, though I did also fill in some of the background with proper textures. I've been using the Akoya size 3 bristle brush for all of these background textures. The brush work is overall pretty rough. I haven't really focused on blending smoothly. It's more of a layering of very visible brush work. I'm very much looking forward to finally working on the chandeliers, as they'll be the brightest point in the illustration. I'm saving them for last, making sure that the midtones work before that. I also still have to rework the sword quite a bit, though I'm more or less happy with how the hands turned out, especially for a small size. I think they are okay. And then I have an absolutely unholy amount of drapery, though the more I go towards the edges, the rougher my paint will be, so I'll probably switch to a larger brush for that. It's still really cold in here. It's just about 12 degrees in here at my workstation, because I haven't turned on the space heater yet, but I'll bundle up, start painting, and ignore all the noisy, stormy wind sounds from outside. By the way, because a lot of time can go by between painting and filming and then actually editing and publishing a video, I often see so many mistakes in my illustrations, or can't help critique my past process. Past Evie, why didn't you use a larger brush and more decisive paint layers for some of the background? Why did those red draping textiles take so long? Past Evie, really, paint those hands instead of avoiding them for the longest time. But that's just part of the process, I guess. It's actually really interesting for me to see what I've learned since I completed an illustration and how I'd approach some parts very differently now, even after just a few months. YouTube videos have been a great tool for self-reflection and accountability in that way. So I'm both deeply upset and concerned by the harm that AI is doing to all creative industries, books, music, painting, and how its output is overwhelming. But I'm also a bit of an optimist in that I think that the counterculture to this is constantly getting more vocal. The people interested in the arts, in books, in movies will always continue to exist, and it's important to collaborate and support each other. The ones hyping Gen AI in creative fields are more like an invasive species to me, and we'll have to find ways to let them wither in obscurity. They weren't part of this community or even industry before, not even as consumers, and I see a lot of pushback against AI in creative spaces the longer it's been going on. My approach to posting work online has changed due to this in recent years as well. I post even lower resolution images than before, I use glaze as a filter over finished pieces, and I tend to not show my face much in videos or even photos nowadays. I believe everyone has to find their personal threshold of what they're comfortable with. I don't want to give too much personal data or art to feed to the machine, but I'm also pretty sure it's a bit too late, and I also need my portfolio website and social media to share my illustrations at this point. As for living in South Korea, working for international clients due to the exchange rate to the won is quite helpful to me, though I don't enjoy the won having such little value. So I can say I'm living quite comfortably, and because I took the transition slowly, I think I'm relatively safe for the moment. The location also comes with downsides for international work. I still can't ship to EU countries, US shipping is limited due to tariffs or was completely interrupted. So, for example, I've pretty much put my shop to sleep and only send out Patreon mail at this stage, while my prints were previously a large part of my income. I also can't attend any of the big industry events in gaming and publishing that I'd love to attend. I'd have to travel around the globe for that. Also, as a foreign resident here, I'm not eligible for most of the stipends or art programs that many of the Korean artists I know take part in. So, clear upsides, some downsides, and overall I am cautiously optimistic, though I am constantly buried in some kind of paperwork. One last question that I found quite interesting. I attend art markets and book fairs here in Korea, but like I said, I can't attend the international fantasy illustration events or book fairs as I'd love to. I think the most valuable connections in this field are the ones with artist friends and peers, giving each other helpful feedback, exchanging knowledge and tips, and just ranting or cheering each other on. So no matter if at real-life events or online, rather than trying to network upwards, I think it's important to just honestly connect with other artists and lift each other up. Once my portfolio was a bit more developed, I started to reach out to art directors or smaller publications, and it's really just a question of persistence. You can always reach out to the same art directors and publishers again after you've updated your portfolio. Individual artists that do solo mentorships online, that I haven't personally taken one of those but could imagine that it's incredibly helpful. I've taken art classes, and while no work has come directly out of those, I still met a lot of artists working in the same field through those and gained a lot of valuable experience. Also attending smaller book fairs, smaller art markets, and getting to know the other people there and just engaging with other people's art that you like and leaving them a kind comment is really important to just keep this community alive, even just over the internet. I often hesitate a bit sharing business advice because my situation is quite unique. The advice I have wouldn't apply to you if you're not working internationally, if maybe you live in the EU or in the US. So I tried to just keep it quite general, not focusing too much on the international work aspect of it, and I just want to show that maybe a slower pace, even if you start later in your life. I was already just in my early 30s when I decided to take this step towards book illustration, towards fantasy art, to kind of learn how to paint and illustrate after doing mostly line drawings and storyboards and just some cute little watercolor illustrations for years and years. I hope that through all of these questions, it showed that there's some flexibility there, that there are multiple paths that you can take, that it's not one size fits all, and that even in these times when it looks intimidating or overwhelming, it's an incredibly fulfilling work that I get to do. I'm incredibly grateful that I now get to illustrate books and characters like this. And I hope I can do it for many more years. And if you have any other questions, feel free to ask away. I'd be happy to chat more in future painting videos, where I'll also talk about the actual painting process a bit more. I just feel like I'd probably have repeated myself, and this illustration is a bit older. I didn't want to give any outdated advice. I hope I can share some more videos over the summer. Spring was incredibly busy, and of course would love to see you again in those videos as well. Thank you so much for watching.